that might be the fault of the town. I just think that the Briscoes, if they appear, let's. XM Senior Vice President of Sports Programming and Podcasting, the legendary Steve Cohen, and SiriusXM Fight Nation Program Director, Mother Marissa Rivas.
SiriusXM Podcasts.
Canidae is proud to be an official pet food of the Nashville Predators. But why do the Predators choose Canidae for their dogs? Well, there are many reasons, but top among them is the shared goal of reducing environmental impact. With more nutrients and protein per cup and wholesome, sustainable ingredients, every bite of Canidae is a world of goodness for their pets and for the planet. Because with Canidae, goodness is the goal. Visit CAN.
Sabotage.
Sabotage.
You say sabotage. I say sabotage.
We say sabotage. You say sabotage. But they're being sabotaged. There is no way, whether you like the Lucha Brothers or not. If you like the Lucha Brothers, you like this match. If you don't, which I have seen FTR against as many luchadors as I want to see, it's a complete opposite style from theirs, and it's not doing them any good at all. But the finish of that match was ludicrous, and whoever called for it, whoever laid it out, whoever was there a walkthrough that somebody could see how rotten this was going to turn out in advance and made them do it anyway? I don't have an answer for that. So you want to get into the tag match?
Let's get into the tag match.
Let's get into the tag match. We saw FTR have the match with, who was it? Samurai Del Sol and oh God,
what was the other guy's name?
His name is the name of a vehicle, a minivan. Aerostar.
Aerostar. Is that a minivan?
I think it is. Anyway, it was rotten because FTR had to stand there and wait for them to get their shit together to do all of their contrived gymnastics. The Lucha Brothers are a little bit better at the contrived gymnastics, but FTR are sharp, precise, they have perfect basics, their excellence of execution, Everything they do is perfectly timed and beautiful to watch. And the Lucha Brothers are all over the place. It's either the gymnastics or the lucha stuff with no basics whatsoever. Complete opposite team of FTR, and as a result, you can't get a real FTR match out of these guys. But it's better than the Lucha Brothers against anybody else, because at least FTR's in there trying. And they also used the corpse referee, Rick Knox, so they had no help at all in trying to make this a wrestling match. It got better when FTR would take over and control the pace a little bit. And at one point they stopped Felix, and I thought they were going to get the heat on him, but he just quickly tagged out. So FTR made it a hot tag through no fault of the Lucha Brothers, because as the guy was just wandering, leaning over, flat-footed, reaching out, Dash makes a run and throws a drop kick and misses it and bounces off the top rope, and then the guy tags. So that made it a hot tag, but the actual tag was bleh. And the Lucha Brothers made a comeback with a forever four-way that they do.
You're listening to Comedy Central.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy.
I'm Micheline Malouf.
And I'm Nadia Desi, licensed therapist and host of Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health. Join us for discussions with Megan Trainor, Chris Bosch, Rebel Wilson, and more.
From discussing motherhood to immigrating to general mental health, our guests are awe-inspiring.
Hello.
We all struggle with the
welcome.
same things. So
My name is Dr. Ian Malcolm. You may have heard of me. Well, correction, you should have heard of me, especially now that you're here. So before you are the islands that you need to manage, if you can. The 5 deaths. Jeez, if only there had been 5. Okay, this is as good a place as any to begin. Isla Matanceros. It's relatively stable. Yeah, you can get your feet wet here, and you should. Diving into the deep end of the pool is where the big, angry, hungry things are. And you want to be ready before you try that.
I'm Cabot Finch, Public Relations and Crisis Management, and I'm here to help you. You'll start by building a Hammond Creation Lab. We've already started on an enclosure for you. You should just attach it to the side. But watch out for dinosaurs. Just kidding. Let's focus on what you're here to do, which is create dinosaur facilities on the islands we call the 5 Deaths. Actually, Las Cinco Muertes, because Spanish is the lingo of choice around here. You'll need to connect it to the pre-existing network of paths in the power grid. Now comes the real test, incubating a dinosaur. You'll start with a Struthiomimus. Select the creation lab and pick a hatchery bay. There's enough genome data for your first viable dinosaur.
The machinations of the ambitious undoing extinction, playing with nature's laws. What can possibly go wrong?
Come on, Doctor. You know we've learned so much and invested even more in our Jurassic operations since the last time.
Yes, Mr. Finch, yes, the last time. There's always a last time. And a next. Life. It begins. The most precious moment. The result of incalculable actions and reactions, trials and errors, genetic mutations and unknowable combinations, chaos, all leading to a living, breathing, thinking being, an entity, distinct and unique. And now we, you, just manufacture them. So, well done, I guess.
The Hammond Foundation has 3 main areas of interest: security, entertainment, and science. I've already nudged the heads of each division to reach out to you personally. They'll offer opportunities and incentives for you to be part of their team. Choose one of their contracts. It'll help you develop your facility. Ah, Dr. Dua. This is our new Director of Operations.
I'm aware, Cabot. I'm Dr. Dua. I run the science division of our operation. Okay, you're going to need to build your reputation in the science division. Not easy with me around, but you'll manage. That means managing our dinosaur population and seeing that they are flourishing.
Contracts can be requested from the division heads inside the control room. Complete these to increase your reputation and gain additional revenue to keep expanding your park. So, one more thing. Your reputation. Your rep, quote unquote. Keep an eye on it, okay? If you have a solid reputation with a division, you're more likely to benefit from them. Financially, I mean. But, like life, it's a balancing act. Each division is vying for your attention, and if they don't get it, they tend to take it personally. People think money makes the world go round, but they're wrong. Contracts make the world go round, my friend. Obligations and commitments. Complete a contract and your rep with the science division will increase, meaning you'll be able to take on more complex and challenging missions.
I've got an interesting opportunity for you to consider. It will allow us to work together to create life. Pure life. If you've been listening to Dr. Malcolm, then you know how important this is to us, and to me.
The Research Center lets you improve your park in various exciting ways. New buildings, upgrades, and more await. The Fossil Center lets you extract DNA from fossils and amber in order to create new dinosaur genomes. Exciting!
I knew you were my kind of person. Inquisitive, driven, and I knew you couldn't resist this opportunity. So let's get started. Together, we can create a more authentic version of our dinosaurs. That means a complete genome. And I think you are up to the challenge. Don't disappoint.
An expedition center will allow you to send dig teams around the world in search of new dino fossils. DNA can be extracted from these fossils, which our scientists can then turn into living, breathing dinosaurs. And that's our true lifeblood. Good! Your first expedition team is out. They'll bring back what they find to the Fossil Center for extraction. Your job is simple, really. Create dinosaurs which attract visitors to your facilities, brings in capital, money, which means you can do more research to build better facilities and create more dinosaurs, and there you go. A circle of life. development and resources, nature and commerce. See? Simple.
Hey, I'm Isaac. I've been hearing good things about you. I'm in charge of the entertainment division here. What good is the world's greatest show if no one sees it? Don't answer. That's rhetorical and painfully obvious. What I'm saying is that we need people in our parks. Fill up our facilities with warm bodies. Numbers bring revenue, excitement, and opportunities.
You should extract genomes from fossils that have been collected inside your fossil center. That will increase the amount of viable data you have to create dinosaurs.
We are making great strides so far. I believe I may be on the cusp of something wondrous, and I have you to thank, at least in part, for where I find myself. Now we need to incubate, hatch, and house our dinosaur. Then we will know if our efforts will be worth it.
My understanding is that this contract helped get us a more reliable dinosaur. Our attractions rely on them, so great work. Hey, it's Isaac. How you doing? I got some cool stuff you need to be a part of, so I'm putting it out there. Come on and help the winning team. Mine.
This is Lambert, head of security.
Yours, theirs, and mine. Welcome to the islands. So here's our basic conundrum. We want to keep our animals under control while simultaneously encouraging instinctive behaviors, because these animals have potential as combatants. Look, everyone's fear object, myself included, is to have these animals running free and loose in the park. But we can't exploit them globally without taking some chances.
dinosaurs, are meeting expectations, but we want them to thrive. That's your next assignment. Making sure our specimens are properly cared for. In other words, dinosaur welfare.
The difference with dinosaurs is that they have no point of reference to understand humans, so don't expect much in the way of thank yous.
I've been monitoring what you've been up to with great interest, and I'm a little disappointed that Dr. Dua came to you for this assignment instead of bringing me into the loop as she should have done. I'll discuss this with her later.
I want to take this contract, which means you want to take it too, correct? Struthiomimus. Interesting. Another dinosaur that furthers the case of a direct linkage to our modern birds.
Contracts are the bread and butter of our work. And who doesn't like more bread?
The science division is a little stronger because of you. A little.
Curiosity Stream.
When you say Heinz, I think ketchup. I say Coors, you think beer.
How do the most iconic food brands become iconic? Unwrap the surprises behind the brands that feed our world on Eat Me or Try Not to. Plus, the best poker face.
Check. I almost folded.
Needs a poker brain. Researchers use MRIs and more to study the tricks of the world's best gamblers in the mind of a poker player. It's on Curiosity Stream. Annual plans are $20. That's $1.67 a month. Visit curiositystream.com.
Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
A few months ago, for many people, your name did not exist in their minds at all in any way, and now you are a superstar, especially for many young people because of your views in and around tax and the super wealthy around the world. How did you come to this from what you do? Because you're a historian.
Yeah.
In fact, you are a Dutch historian.
I'm a Dutch historian.
That's how everyone refers to you, the Dutch historian.
I think, I'm really part of a much wider movement.
a whole new generation that thinks that we need to move on to new ideas.
Yes.
And basically that realize that we need a massive transformation of our economy. So, and I was just in a place at the World Economic Forum where usually not many people get to go there. And I was just one of the few people there maybe talking common sense.
We actually have a clip that went viral. If we can play that right now.
Almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. I mean, it feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water. This is not rocket science. I mean, we can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we gotta be talking about taxes.
Yeah.
That's it, taxes, taxes, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
So this was, to give people context, this was you sitting with the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
And you were actually supposed to be there to talk about just like the other aspects of your book, like universal basic income, etc.
Yeah.
And you surprised everyone with that. They were not happy.
They didn't really like that, no. I was supposed to go there and promote my book, talk about universal basic income, which has become a really popular idea. But during the conference, I became more and more uncomfortable because you can talk about all sorts of issues there, right? Feminism, participation, equality, but then no one raises the T word, right? People don't really talk about taxes and tax avoidance. So I just went to my hotel room and prepared this short speech, and I got the question from the moderator and basically ignored his question and then went ahead.
Since that little moment in Davos, have you noticed a few private jets following you now? Have you? Because it seems like something that would piss a lot of really, really wealthy people off. That idea of them paying more tax and them avoiding it. Why do you think that's more important, or should be like one of the main conversations apart from transparency and equality and philanthropy?
Well, I'm a historian, right? So. If I see someone like, say, President Trump talk about we should make America great again, he wants to go back to the 50s or something like that, I'm like, yeah, well, maybe that's a good idea, because in the 50s, we had much higher tax rates for the rich. In fact, a billionaire like Trump would pay like 90% top marginal tax rate.
Right.
The estate tax was over 70% for people like Trump. So, make America great again. Bring back those higher tax rates. That would be my slogan.
There are many people who'd argue against you and say to you, you say you want to raise taxes on the wealthy, but the wealthy are already paying their fair share of taxes. People are paying almost 50% of what they earn. Isn't that fair? How do you respond to them?
There's this whole boring debate in this country about, capitalism versus socialism. From my perspective, it sounds a bit ridiculous. Like, we're talking about ideas like Medicare for all. 70% of all Americans is in favor of that. Higher taxes on the rich, 75% is in favor of that.
Right.
So it's utterly mainstream. And I know that sort of the standard response here is always, ooh, that sounds like communism. That sounds like Venezuela. But it's not communism, it's common sense.
And you should.
Right? It's what most people support.
Let me ask you this. One of the things I know that gets thrown at me all the time is people go, oh, you raise the taxes and everyone's going to leave, because if you raise the taxes for the rich, then the rich are going to go live in countries where they don't have to pay as much tax, and then you've lost all of those incomes and you've lost all of those people in your country.
Well, America is the most powerful country in the world. It can easily crack down on tax paradises like Holland, where I'm from, right? Where one of the main tax paradises for American corporations. So, that's really a matter of political will, I guess.
Just them being willing to say, hey, we're going to tax you no matter where you go, no matter what you do. Yeah. It's interesting that you fight for these ideas when you come from Europe. People would say to you, but Rutger, you come from a country where things are great. You do have all of these services. People are not struggling as much as they are in other parts of the world. Why is this so important to you then?
Well, the American debate is incredibly influential back in Holland, right? So, and we've got rising inequality in Europe as well,
right?
And the welfare state that is under pressure. But it's also true that if I look at a debate, right, around Medicare for all, for example, America is the only country in the rich world that doesn't have it, and still it has the most expensive healthcare system, and life expectancy is going down. So yeah, that seems pretty ridiculous.
You have a bunch of ideas that many people would consider ridiculous, depending on their age, and I find a lot of young people genuinely love as genius. Utopia for realists. is the book that you wrote, and it's come back into prominence again because it's just like a fun read. You talk about all of these ideas and how they could actually be implemented, which is interesting. It's not just the ideas. Universal basic income, open borders, 15-hour work week. Really, just, I mean, this is like a book. This is like Freddy Krueger for a GOP person. This is like nightmare stories. That's what this is.
Indeed. Did you see the picture of Rupert Murdoch reading?
I actually did. I did see that. We have that picture, Rupert Murdoch. Like, how do you feel about that? There is one of the people you're speaking about.
I framed it, obviously. It's
right.
It's a picture, yeah.
Like, when you talk about these issues, like universal basic income, for instance, seems like a crazy idea. You're just going to pay people to not work, then why would anyone work?
But what not many people know, actually, is that if you go back to the 60s, almost everyone believed, all the experts believed, that some form of basic income was going to be implemented in the United States. And it was actually Richard Nixon, of all people, who had a bill for a modest basic income that got through the House of Representatives twice and was only killed in the Senate by Democrats, not because they didn't like the idea of completely eradicating poverty, but because they wanted a higher basic income. So it's a pretty bizarre history that I describe in the book. Another bizarre thing is that actually there were major trials with basic income in the US back then. Thousands of families received a basic income just to test what would happen. Turns out it was really effective. Healthcare costs went down, crime went down, kids did much better in school. But then there was one problematic finding, is that they also found that the divorce rates went up, quite a lot, because a lot of women were like, okay, I'm gonna leave that asshole. But then all the conservatives obviously said, okay, we don't want basic income anymore. This is going to make women much too independent, right? It was only 10 years later that they found out that they had made a statistical mistake. So in reality, the divorce rate did not go up. It's a pretty bizarre history full of that.
Wait, let me ask you this then. As a historian who is basing your arguments on things that have actually happened, does it frustrate you when you see politicians like Trump I guess misstating their plans based on a history that they don't seem to understand themselves? Because like you said, Trump says we're going to do it the way it was, but then when you propose the way it was, he's like, no, I don't like that. Do you think that as people in general, we just don't know enough about our histories?
Well, what frustrates me the most are these people, the so-called moderates, the centrists, who say, oh, that's never going to happen. That is too radical.
Right.
If you zoom out a little bit, you see that so many times in history, utopian fantasies have become reality. I think that's important to keep in mind. The democracy was once a crazy idea, right? The end of slavery was once a total fantasy. It all happened, but it never starts in the center. It always starts on the fringes, with people who are first dismissed as radical, as crazy, as lunatics, right? So I guess we got to be a bit unreasonable sometimes.
You have to be unreasonable to move the conversation forward. The 15-hour work week is probably my favorite part of your book. How does that even begin to work?
Yeah, well, it goes back to a very old idea, actually, of the economist John Maynard Keynes. He wrote this essay in 1930 that sort of made two predictions. The first prediction was, we're going to be a lot richer in the future, right? If we don't make stupid mistakes like start another world war or have austerity during times of crisis. Well, we did that, but anyway, we'll be a lot richer, and then we'll use that wealth to work a little bit less each year. And then he just extrapolated and said, we'll have a 15-hour work week in 2030. The fascinating thing, again, from the historical perspective, is that up until the 70s, we were on track to make it. The work week was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And the experts were predicting that the biggest challenge of the future was going to be boredom. It's only around 1980 that, throughout the developed world, we've been starting to working more and more, and we've been keeping on inventing these jobs that don't really need to exist. Right? So people sitting in offices, sending emails all day to people they don't really like, and writing reports no one's ever going to read, right? So that's what the academic term is bullshit jobs.
Yes. Yeah, it's just like basically you just sit there and then you're just like, to whom it may concern, reply all, as per my last email, etc., etc. Yes,
exactly,
that's for half of my day.
But then the fascinating thing is that most of these jobs, are people who have wonderful resumes, who went to great universities and have wonderful job titles. But then still, at the end of the day, they're like, you know what, I could go on strike and no one would notice. So in the book, I've got this story of 2 strikes that happened in the 60s. The first strike was of garbage collectors. New York, 1968, lasted for 6 days. State of emergency had to be declared. Turns out, we can't do without garbage collectors.
Right.
So at that point, I wondered, has it ever happened, in history, that the bankers went on strike? Yeah? So I started looking, looked at the past 5,000 years, basically, since the invention of money, and I found only one example, and this was in Ireland, 1970. The bankers were angry that their wages were not keeping up with inflation, so they said, you know what, you'll have it, we're going to go on strike, and then you'll see just how important we are. And all the experts were like, oh, this is going to be a disaster, it's going to be a heart attack for the economy. And then from one day to the other day, 85% of the money supply was not accessible anymore. And nothing much happened, actually. So the strike lasted for 6 months in the end. And after 6 months, the bankers came back and said, all right, we'll get back to work. And I think this is another example where history just makes you rethink, right? Who are the real wealth creators in this country? Does wealth really, is it really created at the top and then does it trickle down? Or maybe it's the other way around. And are the teachers and the garbage collectors and the nurses, are they the real wealth creators?
Wow, that's powerful, man. Let me ask you this as a historian. If we don't take these concepts seriously, if we don't think about how we protect workers and not the jobs themselves, if we don't think about how to get people paying their fair share of taxes, how we stop people avoiding tax, which is a huge issue, what do you then worry would happen based on history?
Well, what I worry about the most is that about the moments when people just don't have hope anymore for a better future, right? So my frustration a couple of years ago when I started writing this book was that I saw so many people, young people or people who call themselves progressives, who only knew what they were against, right? Against austerity, against racism, against homophobia, against all these things. And yes, I'm against them as well. But you also have to know what you're actually for.
Right.
And that's why I'm so excited that you see this whole movement now of indeed younger people who come up with all these fascinating new ideas, sometimes old ideas, sometimes new ideas, like the Green New Deal. That's what excites me the most, because we need hope.
Wow. Thank you for being on the show, man. Really great having you on. Utopia for Realists is a really fascinating read. It's available now. Rutger Bregman, everybody.
The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Ears Edition. Subscribe to The Daily Show on YouTube for exclusive content and stream full episodes anytime on Paramount+.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy.
I'm Micheline Malouf.
And I'm Nadia Desi, licensed therapists and host of Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health. Join us for discussions with Meghan Trainor, Chris Bosch, Rebel Wilson, and more.
From discussing motherhood to immigrating to general mental health, our guests are awe-inspiring. We all struggle with the same things, so let's talk about it and destigmatize them. Find our new podcast, Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health, on iHeart, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
Hello, I'm Minnie Driver, and on my podcast, Mini Questions, I put together a little experiment. I ask trailblazers across different disciplines the same 7 questions. Questions about the inflection points in their life, what they like least about themselves, and what relationship has defined love for them. This season, I'm coming back with new trailblazers, like Blondie vocalist Debbie Harry.
I did have a revelation. It was at CBGB's, as a matter of fact. I was waiting for the audience to give it to me, give it me. Then I realized that I had to make them. I had to command that.
Artist and creative juggernaut Goldie.
And I walk up to the mountain, I hike up. Just being in that environment and seeing life and death in front of you, right in front of you. And I go up there and scream and cry and laugh, and I find that being the happiest.
And many more. Join me as we continue this exploration on Season 2 of Mini Questions, on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
This has been a Comedy Central podcast.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Good to see you again, my friend.
I am thrilled to be here.
And now we know that you had COVID.
I had COVID.
And you shook it off like it was
I
nothing.
shook it off. I mean, I didn't need those monoclonal. I mean, you're a weak person,
And
Joe.
compared
Like,
to you.
if you were like me, you wouldn't need that stuff.
I wouldn't need anything.
I was
You
out
didn't even know
there.
you had it.
I had it. I was out there spreading it. Unaware that I was spreading it. I feel so bad.
Wow.
I was wearing a mask.
Most people, I don't think that works. Most
Yeah.
people did that. Most people were out there spreading it. I mean, what do they say? Like the people that don't show any symptoms, the asymptomatic folks, they were in the high 40%.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a lot of people.
It's crazy. Yeah, but this is not like even PCR test, right? Because one of the things that, as of December,
You're listening to Comedy Central.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy.
I'm Micheline Malouf.
And I'm Nadia Adesi, licensed therapist and host of Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health.
Getting Better.
This is behind the brands that $20.
Star, historian.
I think, I'm really part of a much wider movement, a whole new generation that thinks that we need to move on to new ideas.
Yes.
And basically that realize that we need a massive transformation of our economy. So, and I was just in a place at the World Economic Forum where usually, not many people get to go there. And I was just one of the few people there, maybe
Right.
talking common sense.
We actually have a clip that went viral. If we can play that right now.
Almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share.
You're listening to Comedy Central.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy.
I'm Micheline Malouf.
And I'm Nadia
Owen
Adesi,
Grady.
licensed
Owen's my
therapist and
friend.
host of Getting Better,
I've seen
Stories
things
of
I'd
Mental
rather not
Health.
talk
Join us
about,
for
but it
discussions
hasn't
with
dampened
Megan
my
Trainor,
commitment to
Chris
the
Bosch,
dinosaurs.
Rebel Wilson, and more.
Raptors,
From
more
discussing
generally,
motherhood to
me and Blue
immigrating to
specifically.
general mental
We have a
health, our
special
guests are
relationship, like what I
awe-inspiring.
have with
We all
Claire.
struggle with the same
Less
things, so let's talk about it and
Anyway,
destigmatize them.
nice to meet you.
Find our new podcast, Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health, on iHeart, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
New to Curiosity Stream.
When you say Heinz, I think ketchup. I say Coors, you think beer.
How do the most iconic food brands become iconic? Unwrap the surprises behind the brands that feed our world on Eat Me or Try Not To. Plus, the best poker face.
Check. I almost folded.
Needs a poker brain. Researchers use MRIs and more to study the tricks of the world's best gamblers in the mind of a poker player. It's on Curiosity Stream. Annual plans are $20. That's $1.67 a month. Visit curiositystream.com.
Timothy Snyder. Welcome to the show.
So glad to be here.
You have written a book about tyranny now. I don't understand why. Why would you do this now? I can't think of one good reason.
Yeah, the reason is everything that we know about history, and the reason is the best American tradition, which is that when you're in a moment of peril like this one, you look around for how other people have failed, and you learn from them. So that's what the framers of our Constitution did. But now we have 200 more years of failed democracy and 200 years of smart people we can learn from. The book tries to get that across in about 20 minutes.
You know what, I will say, what I enjoy about the book is it's tiny, it's easy to get through, and it's super interesting. You've got a lot of history in this field. Excuse the pun, but you've studied the rise of fascism in the 1930s. You've published, I think, a dozen books or so. If you were to look at the Trump administration, not to be hyperbolic, but what similarities would you see, or would you say you see between the rise of fascism in, pre-World War II Germany and in the US right now?
Yeah, history is great because history is bracing. On the one hand, it's bracing because it tells us how bad things can get.
Right.
So we're in the second globalization now. The first globalization had opponents. It had crises, it had contradictions, like the First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression. Hitler, Stalin. On the other hand, history is bracing because it tells us what we can learn and what we can do, that there are alternatives. So how are we like the 1930s? Globalization is being challenged.
Right.
That's similar. There are people coming from the far right and saying globalization has a face, maybe a Jewish face, maybe a dark face. That's also similar. Mr. Trump in particular, in his rallies and his habits of speech, is a bit like a fascist. There are things here we have to watch out for. Mm-hmm. But history also empowers. It helps us to get out of these traps, but we have to look at it first.
So if we're looking at history, and we're looking at the core differences. What are the differences? Are the differences that Hitler knew when he was leaking information? Like, what would you say the core differences are in terms of what America is dealing with now versus any leader, not just Hitler in the past?
So there's a reason why I don't use Mr. Trump's name in the book, which is that it's not really about Mr. Trump. It's really about us. History is there for us. It expands what we can see. It expands what we can learn.
Right.
So although it is really important that Mr. Trump invites Russians to the Oval Office with digital equipment at their side and then spills national security secrets, right?
Yes.
That's important.
That is important.
Yeah, right? So I'm agreeing with your opening.
Okay.
But it may be even more important that the Germans and the Soviets and the other people of the 20th century who saw democracy collapse were just as smart as we are, or maybe smarter. So it may be time for us to learn from them what we can do to defend democracy. That's the book.
It's interesting that you say that, because I mean, like, some of these chapters are really fascinating in what they say. Like, for instance, chapter 10 here is believe in truth. And you write, to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power, because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. That's a powerful statement to make. Why is post-truth so powerful?
It goes back to your other question about fascism. So fascism says nothing's true, your daily life is not important, the facts that you think you understand are not important. All that matters is the myth of one nation that's together, the myth of the mystical connection with the leader. When we think of post-truth, we think it's something new, we think it's something that campuses, we think it's something irrelevant. Actually, what post-truth does is it paves the way for regime change. If we don't have access to facts, we can't trust each other. Without trust, there's no law. Without law, there's no democracy. So if you want to rip the heart out of a democracy directly, if you want to go right at it and kill it, what you do is you go after facts. And that's what modern authoritarians do. Step one, you lie yourself all the time. Step two, you say it's your opponents and the journalists who lie. Step three, everyone looks around and says, what is truth? There is no truth. And then resistance is impossible and the game's over.
Wow. You know, my favorite thing about the book, other than the steps that are in it and the stories you tell, is that it's tiny, so you can keep it in your pockets. And then when the tyranny is chasing you, you can be like, what did he say again? Oh, you got one as well. I like your style. Thank you so much for being here. On Tyranny is available now. Timothy Snyder, everybody.
The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Ears Edition. Watch The Daily Show weeknights at 11, 10 Central on Comedy Central and the Comedy Central app. Watch full episodes and videos at thedailyshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to The Daily Show on YouTube for exclusive content and more.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy.
I'm Micheline Malouf.
And I'm Nadia Desi, licensed therapists and host of Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health. Join us for discussions with Meghan Trainor, Chris Bosch, Rebel Wilson, and more.
From discussing motherhood to immigrating to general mental health, our guests are awe-inspiring. We all struggle with the same things, so let's talk about it and destigmatize them. Find our new podcast, Getting Better, Stories of Mental Health, on iHeart, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
Hello, I'm Minnie Driver, and on my podcast, Mini Questions, I put together a little experiment. I ask trailblazers across different disciplines the same 7 questions. Questions about the inflection points in their life, what they like least about themselves, and what relationship has defined love for them. This season, I'm coming back with new trailblazers, like Blondie vocalist Debbie Harry.
I did have a revelation. It was at CBGB's, as a matter of fact. I was waiting for the audience to give it to me. Then I realized that I had to make them. I had to command that.
Artist and creative juggernaut Goldie.
And I walk up to the mountain, I hike up. Just being in that environment and seeing life and death in front of you, right in front of you. And I go up there and scream and cry and laugh, and I find that being the happiest.
And many more. Join me as we continue this exploration on Season 2 of Mini Questions on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
This has been a Comedy Central podcast.
What one of the recently departed said he wasn't going to spend 3 hours standing in a hallway to talk to, Vince McMahon, right? But that's the way the guys got to talk to him. If Vince was in the middle of something and somebody knocked on the door and Vince had Jerry Briscoe or Pat Patterson or Jim Ross or Bruce Prichard or whoever the fuck was in there, if it was somebody that was only going to pitch something or that Vince was going to give a few minutes of his time to out of courtesy and mostly nothing else, then those people were not going to leave that room because they were involved in something that was ongoing. If it was a top guy, Undertaker, Bret Hart, Steve Austin, I could go on, that this conversation was either going to be a little more challenging or a little more meaningful or a little longer or whatever, or a little more sensitive, then Vince would tell whoever, give me some time, and he would sit and talk with that person, or he might keep Jim Ross or Jerry Briscoe or Pat Patterson if they were germane to the topic of the conversation, such as the pay-per-view finish or the contract, JR's and talent relations, or the fucking agent of this thing we're going to do on TV or whatever. But no, there was never any statement made, word out, rule instituted, or scuttlebutt amongst all of us that, no, we're not allowed to leave Vince alone with any of the talent anymore. That's ridiculous. And be quite honest, let's see, 25 years ago, if I was Jackie Fargo, I'd say Shane Douglas versus Vince McMahon, 6-5, you pick it.
I see everyone always acts like Vince is Mr. Tough Guy and Vince could have handled himself with all the boys.
I didn't say all the boys. I'm saying Vince was bigger, Vince was heavier, Vince was jacked up, and fucking Shane may have been madder, but I'd like to have seen that. Because I'm sorry, but I wasn't aware that Shane Douglas was a member of the Gracie family.
That's a good point. That's a good.
Barry Horowitz versus Vince, I'd have 6-5 on that one too. This was 25 years ago. Vince was in his late 40s and fucking jacked to the gills. So,
But jack doesn't mean you could throw a punch, and jack doesn't mean you can take a punch.
Well, no, and neither does it being a mad fucking pro wrestler from Pittsburgh. It mean you can do either one of those things either. I'm just saying it's not like if it had been Steve Blackman going in, I'd say we need to call some people to help Vince out.
Our next question, sent to cornydrivethrue@gmail.com.
And that's not being disrespectful to Shane as a pro wrestler either, because I have a feeling that unless Ricky Morton particularly got a finger in his fucking eye socket, that Vince could have probably taken Ricky in a shoot also. Having fucking at 6 or 7 inches and fucking 40 or 50 pounds on him, but that nevertheless.
Let's get our next question here, Jim. This was sent to cornydrivethrue@gmail.com from John Smirka in Masontown, West Virginia.
Oh, so he's smirking at us, eh?
I remember several years ago, Vince taking part in a question and answer panel with fans on the WWE Network. He was asked what his favorite style of wrestling was, and his answer shocked me. He said he could watch Fit Finlay and William Regal wrestle all day. Is this true, or was he ribbing the fans? If it's true, then why have we endured so much crap wrestling over the years?
I think that, first of all, who do you say Fit and who?
William Regal.
Fit and I don't know that he's ever sat and watched them wrestle all day. If he booked the match in his company, he watched that, but I don't know if he watched it more than once. I think that's something that Vince either would like to be true, that's why he said it, or wants people to think that it's true, which is why he said it. But if you asked him to elaborate, he'd probably say, but that's just for folks like us that like the true sport of wrestling, but of course it won't sell. Or something like that. That's what he'd follow it up with. So, no, that is totally not the kind of wrestling that he's always had the vision of. But in his mind at that point, that was the answer that he wanted to give. That, like I said, for either that he wants it to be true, that's the kind of wrestling that deep down he really likes, but of course he sees that he could never sell it. So that's why he has to make all these concessions, or he thought that was the answer that sounded best to the audience that he had.
The style of wrestling that WWE produces Do you think it's the style of wrestling Vince likes, or just the style of wrestling that he truly believes would do the best business-wise?
Well, see, both. He doesn't want to admit it, especially to an audience of hardcore fans, because who else is going to be on the network, right? This is not just a guy down at the mall that just wants to see the fucking Austin and the beer truck. So, of course, they want to hear him say that. But I think he would like that to be true, that he, really likes that, and it comes back to him having the, the genetic jackhammer, having the balls of steel, being a, man's man.
The security division owes you.
He would almost say it like reverently when I remember when I was a kid and you'd watch so-and-so and he'd shoot the half. That's a Vince expression also, like shoot a half Nelson to turn the guy over to pin him. It's an amateur wrestling thing. He'd shoot the half and he'd hook the guy and do this and do that. But he never made any attempt at promoting wrestling, anything like that. Even when his father was still alive and still the head of the company.
Glad to have you on board.
And he was an announcer.
As you can imagine,
they weren't promoting the WWF
and our security systems.
Had some of the hokiest wrestling in some cases in the country before Vince Jr. came along and got in charge.
Our security protocols
so they never promoted that.
This is where you come in.
But it is what it is.
Your time around Vince, was there ever a match that he raved about? I mean, was there ever something that you watched and you said, wow, Vince really loves this. This may be his favorite match.
I'm going to need you to extract enough DNA from fossils to incubate and hatch a dinosaur.
I mean, every once in a while he might recall or bring up a match from the past. It wouldn't be in the context of, wow, I remember that as being a great match. It would be in the context of that, of the business aspect of that match. Or, something we did there that might work similarly here, or this drew that amount, but not just, wow, that was a great match that I watched as a fan and really enjoyed it, and it's not applicable to what we're talking about here, but golly, I really liked it. No, you never, Well,
not that, but just...
And he liked matches at the time he saw them. He would always praise guys if they had a good match on pay-per-view. He'd never see that match again. He would, unless it was for some type of television production. I can't imagine that there's ever a match that Vince has gone back and watched again just to see it. It would have to, if he sees something back from the past, it's because of a television or video project that they're working on. So it's not like he ever, I've said he absolutely, and this has been borne out other places, and he's told other people this, that they're now revealing in these interviews. He never watched anybody else's wrestling but his own.
Construct facilities to
and
increase visibility.
He never really rewatched his own, except for work. And then, he had his writing team. We would go through the shows and pick out things that needed to be VTR'd or just write in the format package, and the folks at the studio would take care of recapping in a minute and a half what went on in that particular segment. So, he's seeing it as it's going out on television. Is the only time he's ever seen anything again. So he puts guys' matches over, but that's at that point.
Do you think Vince is a fan of wrestling?
No, he's a fan of selling tickets to wrestling. And he remember the quote in one of Bill Apter's magazines in 1986 when he actually did a legitimate interview with Vince. And
Larry
Vince said,
King. It was a Larry King interview.
It was the Larry King interview. But it was a legitimate interview transcript. And he said, I want to be the Walt Disney of wrestling. And that's what, Walt Disney didn't have the most realistic mice, but they sure made the most money off of them. So he's always been about selling the sizzle, not the steak.
But they also don't break kayfabe once you enter the world of Walt Disney World.
Well, that's true. You can tackle one of those fucking mice and kick the shit out of him. He won't take his fucking head off.
I don't know if they still do it, but for years when they hire an executive or a senior executive, they spent a day in Disney World in one of the outfits. So they understood what that was like.
I'd have to make sure I got that job first before I put that.
This question was sent in the corny drive-thru at gmail.com from Chevy from the island.
Chevy, Chevy, I love when you fall down each Saturday night on my TV. Oh, but Chevy, every time that you fall down, I know that you are falling for me. Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner. Who else was in
Lorraine
on that?
Newman. Lorraine Newman. And the funny thing is, they all hated him when they were singing that because he was such a prick to everybody. But here's a question from Chevy from the island. Dear Jim, was Vince right? We all have heard that Vince has lost it, and when it comes to the storylines on Raw and SmackDown, he definitely has lost it. But Jim, when it comes to the wrestlers and their place on the card, does Vince know talent? Outside of FTR, no other ex-WWE wrestler's place on the card has changed since going to AEW. Jon Moxley was always at the top of the card, and just like his time in WWE, I still find him boring. Mr. Brody Lee, or Birdie Lee as he put it here, Mr. Birdie Lee is still a boring mid-card wrestler. Miro debuted as a mid-card talent. Sean Spears is still an underneath guy. Just a few examples. So is Vince right? Because if Tony Khan has them in the same place, then why does everyone make it seem like Vince is out of touch with talent placement?
Well, I don't know if one has to do with the other. Those guys would be... It wasn't hard to figure out, use Jon Moxley in the main event because you paid that much money for him and he is an ex-WWE star and has mainstream television. But as far as the rest of them, I don't know if they're in the same place in AEW or if they're worse off. Because they sure got more out of old Miro in the WWE from what I'm seeing than they are in AEW. You've seen him. You would concur with that. You saw more of him in the WWE than I did, right? I don't see a lot of these guys holding their position that they had in the WWE, except for FTR, which, yeah, they're featuring them, but damn, they're featuring them in such a stupid, convoluted way. Are they baby faces? Are they heels? The guys that everybody was wanting to see them against, the Young Bucks, are now whiny, bitchy, fucking smart-ass heels, right when they actually have a heel team come in to work with them and they need to be baby faces. They were baby faces before. Vince does know talent. As we just talked about earlier, Vince wanted to push Roman Reigns. Problem is, he was stubborn and wanted to push him as his top babyface instead of letting the people get to like him by making him a heel first and making him not like him, and then switching him. And then because Vince does not know talent in all cases because he has what is it? Is it he doesn't see some guys like Bryan Danielson as a top guy because of the lack of size and or over-the-top personality. But at the same time, there are exceptions to the rule. I'm the same way in a lot of cases. This group of grade schoolers, in modern-day wrestling, does not intimidate or inspire anybody to fucking go, wow, look at that guy. But when you've got a guy like Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, that was so good in the ring, was that even though he wasn't very tall, he had the body for his height, and he could perform, and the people saw that he was getting the raw end of the stick, and so they hijacked the whole show in his behalf. Vince has a problem using some guys like that. Vince never saw anything in Chris Candido, which to me, I don't care if he was 5'6". He also could out bench press 80% of the fucking locker room. So, yes, Vince knows talent better than Tony Khan does. That's why he's got most of it. And as far as using them better, it depends on what Vince's personal picadillos are. But I think while Vince's track record is not as good as it used to be with picking and using talent, the right talent in the right way, it's still, unfortunately, a whole lot better than the option. If you